Good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. This is Josh. This is Talking Smarks. And after several months of taking a little bit of a hiatus, having to get a lot of other things sorted out in my professional as well as my personal life, at that time I was not able to dedicate the time to be able to make the show of the quality that I know that I can, and I refuse to release anything that's half baked or half done. That's just not who I am. So I just took the time to get things sorted out. And now we are back after so many months. We are back, and we are back with a big one. Just wanted to introduce some of the newer changes coming to the show. We're going to do a little bit of a different format. We are going to have more planned out segments. We have brand new music. We have brand new equipment that we're using to get this show recorded, which will allow me to record much more regularly and be able to get stuff online, both on Spotify, and we will be back on YouTube. Just announced, we will be back on YouTube. I thank you all so much for your continued support of the Twitter page, because I'm not calling it X. Sorry, Elon. And the Insta pages. I thank you all for your support. Every single like, click, mention, comment. I thank you all. It'll continue to help this thing grow. And now let's go ahead and dive right into it. The whole reason that we're here. The year that was 2023 in professional wrestling. Arguably, one of the biggest years, if not the biggest year for the entire industry, and in an industry full of very significant years, that is saying a lot. I am going to go ahead and start with the bread and butter. The whole reason that I even started this show in the first place. We'll go ahead and get started with most of the things that happened in All Elite Wrestling. I say most because so much happened, and if I tried to document every single little thing, we would be here all day long. So I'll just go ahead and give you the highlights, starting with the Chicago-sized elephant in the room, CM Punk. Now, this will be just for the most part the highlights, because at this point you need a whole encyclopedia to document everything that happened during CM Punk's AEW run, because that was unprecedented in good or bad, depending on who you ask. When Punk arrived in AEW in August of 2021, and then we noticed it going into early 2022, Colt Cabana, who we know was his former best friend, who hosted the Art of Wrestling podcast, that infamous episode of the Art of Wrestling podcast, where CM Punk dropped his massive shoot interview on his time in WWE, which then later on led to lawsuits, the ending of his friendship with Colt Cabana, and just every bad thing you can imagine. We notice Colt Cabana just disappears from AEW programming. He starts showing up in Ring of Honor. There are rumblings that CM Punk is behind the whole thing. No one really knows for sure. We notice that there are just more and more rumblings in the crowd. People make references to it during the big feud with CM Punk and Eddie Kingston. There are obviously barbs thrown at Punk's reputation of being a little bit of a backstage politician, a little bit of a snake. On May 25th, 2022, this is the Dynamite Go Home show before Double or Nothing. CM Punk is scheduled to face Hangman Page for the AEW World Championship in the main event. This is happening in Las Vegas. During the final face-off promo, Hangman makes a comment about Punk coming in here promoting workers' rights, but according to him, that's the exact opposite of what Punk's been doing since he got there. Everyone thinks, oh, it's just the typical Punk reference. Turns out, Punk had no idea that Hangman was going to say this. Later on in the promo, Hangman goes on to say that at Double or Nothing, he's going to be defending AEW from CM Punk. At first, we don't really think anything of it. With hindsight now, the match happens at Double or Nothing a few days later on May 29th in Las Vegas. In hindsight, in a later on interview, Punk claims that Hangman was working very stiff through the match and taking some cheap shots at him. I'll let you be the judge of that. Punk wins the title at Double or Nothing. It is a very short reign, however, because 3 days later at the Forum for Dynamite, also the same Dynamite where MJF dropped his own pipe bomb, which would later on start a whole other chain of events. CM Punk injures his foot doing a stage dive from the stage to the crowd, coming out with the AEW World title. He has to leave for a few months, which leads to Jon Moxley becoming the interim AEW World Championship. And then we have the whole saga between CM Punk and Jon Moxley allegedly not working well together. I'll let you be the judge of that. There's just so much there. On September 4th, 2022, All Out in Chicago, Punk wins back the AEW World title from Jon Moxley. MJF returns, begins the famous devil gimmick, which is still being used today. After the match, during the media scrum, usually not a lot happens at the media scrum. Usually the winners of the matches come out, they take questions from the press, almost like a post-fight press conference, kind of like what you see in boxing and MMA. CM Punk decides to take it upon himself while he is at the microphone to publicly bash not just Hangman Page, calling him names that I cannot say, this is a PG show, and also trashing the MVPs, also throwing a spew of profanities their way. So the EVPs of AEW, we have Matt and Nick Jackson, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega. Bashes all three of them. We come to find out later on at the end of Punk's tirade, he goes back to the locker room. Allegedly, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega confront him, and Punk's camp and the EVPs and their camp get into a massive brawl, which leads to the coining of the term Brawl Out. As a result of this, all parties involved are suspended. Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, CM Punk, Ace Steel, a person in Punk's camp, Brandon Cutler, Michael Nakazawa, everybody that was involved in the brawl was suspended. Punk is going to be gone for a little bit of time because, lo and behold, he injured himself yet again in the main event match with Jon Moxley. At Full Gear later on that year, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega return from their suspension. All seems to be going on well. We don't hear a peep from Punk until later on in May. In May, we end up hearing about the debut of AEW Collision, with the first episode set to air June 17th from the United Center in Chicago. And guess who's going to be the featured attraction? CM Punk. CM Punk is basically given his own show away from Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. Collision has a different presentation, a different creative team. It has its own roster. Punk is basically given carte blanche to book whoever he wants on there. If he wants somebody on Collision, he'll bring them on. If he doesn't, he will not have them on there, allegedly. And this leads to beef between, of course, the EVPs, CM Punk, other talent that at first thought they were going to be on Collision, and then turns out they weren't because Punk vetoed their appearances. It was an entire mess. When Punk returns at the United Center, he cuts a promo where he says that David Zaslav, who is the head of Warner Brothers Discovery, we'll come back to him later. But allegedly, David Zaslav calls him One Bill Phil because he is the only dime in a business full of counterfeit bucks. Obviously taking a shot at everything that had happened in the months prior. Throughout this time, we hear about an alleged spot where Jack Perry was set to be off TV. He already had a vacation plan, but allegedly to write him off TV, they wanted to do an angle on Collision that involved real glass. Basically, he would get taken out, and that would be how to write him off TV while he takes his vacation. Allegedly, the higher-ups on Dynamite approved the spot, and they said, oh yeah, we can do it on Collision. Allegedly, when he got to Collision, he was told that he could not do the spot. This ties in a little bit later, and allegedly Punk making other comments about Jack Perry, as well as taking shoots at Hangman Page after Collision goes off the air, calling him a peg warmer, and there's just so much here. Like I said, if I tried to go through every single little thing here, we would be here all day. It would be like a 4-hour long episode. which I don't know. I don't think I can even hear myself talk for 4 hours if we're being honest. At August 27th, at All in London at Wembley Stadium, one of the final matches on the 0 hour pre-show before the main show is set to be Jack Perry versus Hook. No rules, no DQ for the FTW Championship. During the match, we see a limo because part of Jack Perry's entrance is because he's now the heel, the Hollywood heel, comes out in a limo. The limo is still parked on stage. Jack goes, knocks on the windshield of the limo, looks into the camera and goes, "You know what this is? Real glass. Go cry me a river." Making a direct shot at Punk and the whole broken glass incident. The match finishes. Jack Perry goes backstage. Allegedly, Punk confronts him and they get into a fight. Yes, Punk just barely came back and here he is fighting again. Allegedly, during this fight, afterwards, allegedly, Punk even lunges at Tony Khan, the head honcho of AEW. Punk is suspended, or allegedly both parties are suspended yet again. To this date, at the time of recording this episode, we have still not seen Jack Perry back on AEW television. September 2nd of 2023, prior to an episode of Collision, Tony Khan announces that CM Punk's contract has been terminated with cause, citing the safety of not just himself, but the fans and everybody else involved, allegedly stating in the infamous quote that he feared for his life at the show. Or, my apologies, when the altercation with Punk happened. That's it. That is the end of CM Punk's time in AEW. He arrived with a bang, left with a bang. And we don't hear a peep out of Punk for months. There is speculation about what his future is. He had allegedly made an appearance backstage at some Impact tapings. Everyone thinks, oh, maybe he'll go to Impact. Maybe he'll work indies. No one knows for sure. Maybe he'll retire. On November 25th of 2023, at the Allstate Arena in Chicago. Chicago comes in a lot during this year. Obviously, it's one of the hottest towns in professional wrestling. At the very conclusion of Survivor Series, and I'm saying the very conclusion, at the point that the WWE copyright logo was popping up on the screen, that's like the universal sign for us to know that the show is truly coming to an end. The Titantron changes, Cult of Personality starts playing, CM Punk, hell has frozen over. CM Punk returned to WWE. After everything he had said and done and the podcasts and all the shots he took at them while he was part of AEW, he returned. The crowd was popping. Just one of the biggest pops you will ever hear. And right now, CM Punk has the machine behind him. I mean, completely behind him. They're making the shirts. They're putting him on all the billboards. He's everywhere. He's on Raw. He's on SmackDown. He showed up just about everywhere you can think of. It wasn't like his original run when he was the voice of the voiceless, where the WWE had to begrudgingly make that merchandise because people were demanding it. Now here they're doing it almost gleefully, even releasing shirts that say "Hell Froze Over" with Punk's logo on them. Even making new versions of just that iconic Best in the World shirt. Just absolutely unprecedented. The saga of CM Punk in AEW, which then leads to his exit from AEW and his eventual return to WWE. And that's the major events of the year for AEW. Yes, the vast majority of it was CM Punk, and that's, depending on who you ask, that's either good or bad. I say It's a little bit of a shame because there was so much great in-ring work. There were so many great storylines in AEW this year, but nearly all of them got overshadowed by everything that happened with CM Punk. Just one mention of his name, firestorm of people show up. Even on this channel. Watch, I get this audio uploaded, it'll get quite a bit of views. Why? Just because I mentioned the name CM Punk. Now, let's not get it wrong here. I am a CM Punk fan. That original run with the pipe bomb, that was one of my favorite runs ever. I've seen his original stuff in Ring of Honor. I loved what he was doing in AEW. Post Brawl Out, that's a different story. That was just a slightly different version of Punk. But the feud with Eddie Kingston, the feud with Mox prior to us knowing, in hindsight, everything that we know now about what occurred with that feud backstage and behind the scenes. The feud with MJF was arguably the biggest and the best feud so far in the company's history. It led to some truly great promos. It led to arguably the greatest dog collar match of all time at Revolution 2022. There was so much storyline potential there, and it's all gone. Can't do it now, can't go back to it. It's been just such an absolutely chaotic time for AEW. And the reason I mentioned David Zaslav calling Punk one Bill Phil, AEW's television rights are up for renewal. So that means Dynamite, that means Rampage, that means Collision. Warner Brothers Discovery, headed by, you guessed it, David Zaslav, is open to negotiating with WWE. This could bode not well. This could bode very bad for AEW. Originally, Punk's drawing power was one of the main reasons that AEW got those extra 2 hours to do Collision. And now, if there is a chance that WWE programming could end up on Warner Brothers airwaves, what does this mean for AEW? Are they just going to kick AEW off and have WWE on there? Are they going to try to share them both? There's no way that they'd give them equal time. AEW is a very big company, but the WWE is much, much, much bigger. And I'm not saying this as like a jaded fan. I'm a realist. I know what it looks like. Yes, AEW is huge, but WWE has been around. They're the mainstay, and they're huge. They are a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. Even bigger still. While AEW was going through their respective bouts of turbulence throughout 2023, WWE did not escape any sort of turbulence either. This was arguably the biggest, but arguably backstage the most turbulent year in WWE's history. And we're about to dive into why. So before we go ahead and get right back into it, I have to take you back all the way to July 22nd of 2022 to the story of how this affected WWE in 2023. On July 22nd of 2022, Vince McMahon retires, I put quotes here, this will come in handy later, from the WWE after a massive sexual misconduct and hush money scandal. This broke in the Wall Street Journal, an incredibly relevant newspaper, a very well-respected newspaper. So this wasn't just some wrestling dirt sheet that reported on this. No, this was a mainstream news source that broke this story. It picked up mainstream news attention. It got to the point that Vince McMahon chose to retire from WWE as his position of chairman and CEO and the de facto head of creative. That infamous tweet where he says, at 77 years old, time for me to retire. And then the whole then, now, together, forever. Cuts that infamous promo on SmackDown where he doesn't really say anything. He just goes up on stage, just a smug, "Welcome to SmackDown," and then leaves. Which still to this day makes zero sense why he did it. But he did it. At this time, we think, oh, okay, that's the end of the Vince McMahon era. At that time, Triple H is put in charge of creative, and it's his ship to run. So we think. Keep in mind, at the time that Vince retired, he may not be the chairman and CEO anymore. But what he is, he's still the majority shareholder. He still has all the power. He's just not sitting in the office. In early January, Vince returns to power under the guise that as the majority shareholder, he has final say on any media rights deals, which, keep in mind, at the time, WWE's media rights are up for renewal. Same thing with AEW. It's a milestone year for both companies, trying to get their product on a TV and trying to get more money out of those deals, of course. He basically threatens that if he is not allowed back into power and back on his seat as chairman of the board, he will use his majority stakeholder power to veto any media rights deals that are coming up. He basically strong arms his way back to the top. It's almost like an episode of Succession. He gets back into power, and what does he do? He ousts the board members that were leading the investigation into him that led to his retirement. He is a power-hungry man. That cannot be denied. We could not deny it back then. We can't deny it now. That's in January. And it is also alleged that he is back in the driver's seat of creative because we begin to notice a gradual shift in some of the booking choices on Raw and SmackDown. It seems very more like a Vince McMahon product again rather than a Triple H booked product. We know the talent that Vince McMahon likes to use. We know the talent that Triple H likes to use. On April 3rd, 2023, this might still be the biggest day in the history of WWE. Endeavor, which is the parent company of the UFC, yep, Dana White, Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, Amanda Nunes, yes, that UFC, have announced that they have signed an agreement to form a $21 billion global live sports and entertainment company made up of the UFC and the WWE. This company would later be known as TKO. At this point, it is pretty well obvious, and it is reported by several sources within the wrestling industry, that Vince McMahon is still fiddling with creative. One of the biggest examples of that, Night 1 of WrestleMania that year was booked by Triple H. Absolutely incredible show, had incredible flow top to bottom. It was just an absolutely great first night. Night 2 was booked by Vince McMahon. Had some very bizarre decisions. A lot of the Vince-isms returned. And the post-Mania episode of Monday Night Raw, it is alleged that Vince McMahon basically rewrote the entire show at the last second, as he is known to do, to try to impress some of the higher-ups at Endeavor, completely throwing off any post-Mania plans that Triple H had cooked up. Later on in the year, things change once again in the power structure of WWE. It is alleged that Vince McMahon is ordered to no longer be involved in creative. He can't touch creative anymore, allegedly. It's firmly Triple H's show. He's in charge of it. Vince is essentially relegated to basically being a paper pusher, allegedly, within the structure of the company. He still has power, even though he sold quite a bit of his stock, but he doesn't have nearly as much power as he did. He can't touch creative anymore. The man behind that, allegedly, Ari Emanuel, the CEO of Endeavor. The guy who Vince picked, allegedly under the guise that he would still be able to run the WWE. They even did a very now infamous joint interview together when they announced the merger of the UFC and the WWE to form TKO. So basically, Vince pulled the swerve of the century only to get Uno reverse carded. Vince doesn't really have this company anymore. It's sold. It's not truly his anymore. It's Endeavor's. What Endeavor chooses to do or not do, well, that's all for them now. But it has been just absolutely an unprecedented year. But also, in terms of business, WWE has their biggest year ever. And that's saying a lot for a company that has a lot of big years. Even during the Attitude Era, in terms of money made, they completely trumped the Attitude Era at this point. According to their social media, WWE has had their biggest year ever, their highest amount of social media views ever, their highest merchandise revenue ever, their highest grossing ticket sales ever, their highest sponsorship revenue ever, their highest premium live event viewership ever. They are not struggling financially by any stretch of the imagination. So if anybody thought, oh, Vince is gone, WWE is going to flounder, no, not at all. But now we get to a slightly more somber part of 2023. This is in memoriam of some of the biggest stars in the industry that we lost in 2023. And let me tell you, some of the names on this list just absolutely hurt me. We started the year on January 17th with the sudden, shocking passing of Jay Briscoe, one half of the Briscoes, one of the greatest tag teams of this century. Jay, his brother Mark, just absolutely absolute game changers in the ring. Mark Briscoe is still going strong, the Sussex County Chicken. He's been on AEW programming more and more often. He's also a mainstay of Ring of Honor. That one actually hurt. Coming off the heels of arguably the best match of their careers, the best trilogy of their careers, the trilogy of matches they had in Ring of Honor with FTR. Just absolutely incredible match. What a way for him to go out. On May 17th, we lost Superstar Billy Graham. Superstar Billy Graham was a trailblazer in the industry. His gimmick, his presence, the mutton chops, let's not forget the mutton chops. He was so far ahead of his time. We lost him as well. He is also a cautionary tale when it comes to steroids and other drug abuses in the wrestling industry. On June 7th, we lost the Iron Sheik, arguably one of the, if not the greatest heel in all of wrestling. That man never stopped playing the gimmick, even long after his days in the ring were over. His Twitter channel was one of the greatest that you will ever see. The amount of times he would say jabroni or tell somebody to F themselves or to tell Hulk Hogan to F himself. I'm going to be completely honest with you all. I thought the Iron Sheik would live just long enough to outlive Hulk by one day even. Because we all know the animosity between those two. And now that Hogan is allegedly, getting baptized and doing all of this, it's like, all right, but when you show up, the Sheik's going to be ready there to camel clutch you into oblivion there, Hulkster. It's going to be just absolutely insane. He will be so missed. I miss him already. Whoever is still running his Twitter account, honestly, I love it because it's just the typical Iron Sheik jargon. Like, please keep that going forever. On August 23rd, we lost Terry Funk. Absolute legend of the business. Even in the old territory days, going into his resurgence in the late 90s, early 2000s as a hardcore icon. ECW, both the original ECW as well as WWE's strange revival of it, at least the early few years of it. The amount of times that man claimed to retire and then unretire, that's just legendary. That man is arguably one of the best to ever do it. His longevity, his presence, he was one of a kind. He will be terribly missed. And finally, not even 24 hours later, and this one hurt me the most, on August 24th, far, far too soon, we lost Bray Wyatt. One of the most creative gimmicks, one of the most creative minds of this last decade, or even throughout the history of this entire industry, in such a short span of time. We got Husky Harris, we got the Eater of Worlds, we got the Fiend, the Firefly Funhouse. We got whatever his next gimmick was supposed to be. It was still developing at the time of his death, with Uncle Howdy and the Firefly Funhouse and all the gimmicks kind of coming together. There is so much. There were so many storylines and so many creative ideas that this man had that we may never know of. It's unknown if he wrote any of them down, if he had any of them typed up and saved somewhere. But he was absolutely one of the most creative and, from a backstage standpoint, one of the most beloved people back there. One of the kindest individuals you will ever meet, despite his, at times, frightening demeanor, especially when he was in the ring. He will be terribly missed. There will be an entire generation of up-and-coming wrestlers whose creative ideas were inspired by Bray Wyatt. We miss him. I miss him terribly. Like, that kind of creativity, that is such a rare thing, to be able to reinvent just these larger than life gimmicks over and over and over again. And not just that, but the makeup, the wrestling style, everything ties in together. It's just absolutely unprecedented. He will be so terribly missed. His absence will be felt for a long, long time. But now, on a more uplifting note, time to get to some of my moments of the year. And these are just my personal opinions, all right? You know, obviously, I'm not Dave Meltzer. I'm not Brian Alvarez. I'm not Sean Ross Sapp. You know, I'm just the guy with the wrestling podcast. So these are just my opinions. Show of the year, All in London. Finally, after nearly 30 years professional wrestling, or no, over 30 years, what am I saying? Pro wrestling, not WWE, but just pro wrestling returning to Wembley Stadium. They had been starving for a show of that size, and they delivered. Yes, it was the site of Brawl In, but other than that, top to bottom, it was an incredible show. One of the biggest shows in wrestling history, a watershed moment in the industry. Match of the year has to go to Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay, their first match at Wrestle Kingdom 17 at the Tokyo Dome. That was one of the most intense, one of the most exhilarating, and one of the most terrifying matches you will ever see. There are matches far bloodier. There are matches that have all the weapons you can think of. But I challenge you to find any match that from an in-ring standpoint was as brutal as this. I mean, we had faces going through those legendary hard tables of New Japan Pro Wrestling. It was absolutely brutal. One of the greatest matches that you will ever see. The follow-up match at Forbidden Door was also as good. But to me, what brought it down a peg was the Don Callis interference. I know they had the storyline going in AEW, but they could have executed that a little bit better. Or they could have just, for 1 week, postponed that storyline for a second, just let Ospreay and Omega go at it. So that's what brought it down a peg for me. Otherwise, it might have taken the top spot, because the follow-up at Forbidden Door was just absolutely incredible as well. And I encourage you all to go watch them both. Celebrity Wrestler of the Year, that goes to Logan Paul. I know. Wait, what about Bad Bunny? Bad Bunny did amazing. That street fight at Backlash with Damian Priest was incredible. He is an incredible talent as well. But the reason I give Logan Paul the honor is because Logan Paul had more matches. Had Bad Bunny had a few more matches in there, it would have been absolutely insane. It would have been maybe even a tie. But Logan Paul, he can go in the ring. It can't be questioned. He's also an incredible heel. That man is a real life heel. He thrives off of the crowd hating his guts. It's been proven time and time again, and he is just a freak athlete. All the matches with Ricochet, all the spots with Ricochet, the spots with Rey Mysterio. Like, this man, say what you want about him and his brother and how they make their money, but he's truly a talent. Like, if Logan Paul decided to devote himself to this full time, the sky's the limit for him. The crowd of the year has to go to Backlash in Puerto Rico. That crowd was ludicrously hot the entire show, start to finish. And if you don't believe me, go back and watch Bad Bunny's entrance from that street fight. You had the entire crowd singing every lyric, and he used one of his songs as entrance music. But just to hear that crowd just going absolutely unhinged the entire show, that is a rare sight to see. We got to do more shows in Puerto Rico. WWE, AEW, Impact, whoever. Do more shows out there. Those crowds are insane. And as for the mainstream wrestling moment of the year for me, that would have to go to the Iron Claw. Oftentimes when we hear about stories in wrestling being adapted into, movies, TV shows, oftentimes there is a degree of skepticism because of the sheer nature of professional wrestling. It's a scripted thing. Backstage, everyone knows who's going to win, who's going to lose. There's good guys, there's bad guys. And it can be difficult to translate that to a cinematic experience and really get people invested in it. We've had some good examples over the years. We had The Wrestler, which, incredible movie, but it was also a fictional story. The Iron Claw bucked the trend. Going back to The Wrestler, incredible movie. Mickey Rourke did an incredible job. The cinematography in that movie is beautiful, but also just so brutal at times. We also had Heels, incredible show on Stars. I'm sad that it got canceled. I hope that it finds a home on another network, another streaming service, just anything of that nature. I really do hope that we do get a season 3 because it was an incredible show. Stephen Amell did an incredible job. We also had, Glow on Netflix, also great show. So we've gotten kind of this upward trend of shows, paying respect to the business, and obviously the production teams doing the research and portraying the business, not trying to sugarcoat the business, obviously, but paying it the respect that it deserves and not treating it as like, oh, it's hokey. These, men and women are just dressing in tights and play fighting. Like, no, treat it with respect. The Iron Claw. This was an A24 production. A24 is just absolutely growing in steam right now. Their slate of films has just been something else. And when you take a director, Sean Durkin, who is a legitimate fan of professional wrestling and a fan of the Von Erichs, which were the main subject of this film. Oh yeah, we all know the Von Erichs. We all know that story, especially us diehard professional wrestling fans. We know the triumph of the Von Erichs. We also know the tragedy of the Von Erichs. When you pair a director who is that passionate about the source material, being a legitimate fan, growing up watching the Von Erichs, pair that with a cast and crew of people who are dedicated to telling the story respectfully and as authentically as possible. I mean, Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, Lily James, Holt McCauley, Harris Dickinson, just the whole cast did an incredible job. I mean, they got into incredible shape for their roles, did an extensive amount of research on their roles. I am fully in the running saying that Zac Efron should get a Best Actor Oscar nomination. He did incredible. Jeremy Allen White, give him a Best Supporting Actor nomination. They were the two standouts of the film for me, but there was just so much authenticity. The way they talked, the way that they practiced the wrestling, the way they filmed the wrestling. Instead of doing a lot of quick cuts, they actually filmed full matches in front of people. The recreation of the Sportatorium, one of the most iconic venues in all of wrestling. They practically rebuilt that thing from the ground up and recreated it for the movie. The recreation of some of the TV presentation, yeah, they used some archive footage, but then some of the stuff that they did in real life was, or that they filmed for the film, was just incredible. The TV presentation, I haven't found out yet, so if somebody knows, please tell me. The way that they recreated Harley Race, at least the TV footage, I can't tell if that was if they shot that footage or if they used archive footage of the real Harley Race. The guy did an incredible job. Just the portrayal of Ric Flair is, at least for us diehards, is going to be kind of a sticky spot, because while the guy they got kind of looked like Ric Flair in passing, he definitely talked like Ric Flair and he moved like Ric Flair. But the voice, that is my one nitpick of the movie. The voice, he spoke like Ric Flair, but Ric Flair has an iconic voice, an iconic delivery. The actor that they got, and he did a good job, but just the voice didn't cut it. As to why, we'll never know, but that's my only nitpick. But other than that, absolutely incredible movie. All of us here, the crew of Talking Smarks, have seen it. Shout out actually to my friend Brian. He watched it first. My brother Brian, he beat me to the punch and he watched it first, then followed by me a few days later. They actually showed it here in my hometown, which is kind of surprising. A24 doesn't really do wide releases. We have a local independent movie theater here in my hometown, and that's the one that usually gets any movies that A24 releases. You typically don't see them very often in like a Cinemark or a Regal Theaters or anything like that. My local Cinemark, literally down the road from where I live, had the movie. So I got to watch it there. It was absolutely incredible. The movie's been getting an incredible amount of hype, especially with awards season coming up. I really do hope that this paves the way for more accurate adaptations of stories in wrestling. It has been alleged that Chavo Guerrero, he actually played the Sheik in the Iron Claw, and he served as like the wrestling consultant on the film, actually helping to train the cast on how to wrestle and how to look convincing and portray their roles accurately. It is alleged that he has been approached now to do an Eddie Guerrero biopic. Now, given Eddie's story and the fact that so much of it has to do with the WWE, and obviously so much of that footage, especially from the most well-known part of his career, was in the WWE, it'll be tricky to see how they do it, because Eddie Guerrero's story, he was no saint. There are some darker moments in there. And I really do, and obviously there are other people involved in Eddie's story that sadly, after Eddie's passing, went on to do horrible things. And it is literally impossible. I've actually tried this. I actually tried to crack my hand at a screenplay and trying to see if I can do an outline of what an adaptation of Eddie Guerrero's life would be for a movie or even a TV show. It is literally impossible to tell that story without also telling this other individual's story. I don't even want to say his name. But I've tried it. I've literally tried any which way, even tried to focus it on maybe other parts of his career or of his life. And it's literally impossible to tell one story without the other. I couldn't do it. If there's somebody else who's willing to take a crack at it, let me know. But I'm not ashamed to admit it, I couldn't figure it out. If someone else can, that's on them. But that about brings us to the end of this first episode of Talking Smarks for 2024, the year that was 2023 in professional wrestling. I thank you all so much for listening, for your continued support. Wow, I can't talk today. Here's to a bigger and brighter future for this show. I do still live tweet during Dynamite. I do still live tweet during Collision. You will see more activity just across the board, across all the channels. We are back. We are all the way back. This is our time, and we're going to take it. And I thank you all so much, and you all have a great rest of your day.